Hello everybody, Argent here, and I just got out of my first post-lockdown movie, Random Acts of Violence. This weekend in Toronto, they've reopened the theaters, so I was able to get out and see a movie, which I was pretty excited about. I've been really wanting to get some popcorn and just kind of get out of the house and enjoy some quality content. So if you're interested, at the moment the theaters are kind of barren. I think they're only allowing about 10 to 20% of the theater to be filled, and all the seats are reserved, and they're really scattered across the place, so there's no chance of contact. There is popcorn though, and that's, at the end of the day, that's what really matters, is whether or not you can access popcorn. So with regards to what's out, there's not a ton. Most of what's in the theater at the moment is re-releases. There's Jurassic Park, which, who knows, if it stays in theaters a little while, I might go see. One of my all-time favorites. A bunch of Nolan movies kind of in preparation for Tenet coming out. And just kind of some other random stuff that was out, like Sonic the Hedgehog, prior to the lockdown. So I was kind of looking through this and like, none of it really catches my attention. And then I saw there was like an independent Canadian horror film called Random Acts of Violence. And I started looking at it, and when I was looking into it, I'm like, oh, okay, it's like this meta-narrative horror film. It's 18A, which is kind of unusual. It's rare for movies to get released in Canada that are above 14A, at least in my experience. I remember back when I used to work at a movie theater, it was very, very rare that we would ever get an 18A movie. 18A is kind of like the upper end of R and lower end of NC-17. It's kind of weird because each country has like a completely different rating system. Like RPG in Canada, I find often will incorporate lower end of R. But anyways, it was unusual, so I'm like, I'll give it a try. So, Random Acts of Violence. Was it a good movie? Was it a bad movie? It's kind of hard to rate. I don't think it was very good, but it wasn't terrible. The fact that I wasn't like bored when I was watching it is, generally speaking, a large plus in the favor of whatever film I'm watching. The fact that I wasn't bored, combined with the fact that I really had no idea where the movie was going. And that can be a good thing, or that can be a bad thing. In this case, I think it was more a good thing than a bad thing. I don't think ultimately, though, the movie made a whole lot of sense. But it is very, very, like, kind of hipster, postmodernist narrative within a narrative meta thing, which I kind of have a love-hate relationship with. If you've read my book, Not So Subtle Plug, No Chance, it's very much a postmodern novel. Like, it draws a lot of, like, the whole meta-narrative. Like, characters will reference, kind of indirectly, the fact that they're in a story. Things will just happen that are obviously, like, dramatic devices and that sort of thing. So I do kind of like aspects of it, but at the same time, and maybe that's what this movie was trying to get across, it kind of has to serve a purpose. Just inserting random meta, postmodern, self-reflexive shit without any kind of, like, purpose is just, I mean, I guess as this movie states, is just jerking off random acts of violence. So, maybe let me just try to explain the plot of this movie, and that's going to be kind of difficult. So, I don't really remember anybody's names, but the main character is a comic book writer who's created the most successful R-rated comic of all time. The most successful R-rated comic of all time, which is called Slasher Man, which is based off of the I-90 killer. I think this was a real story. If not, it's like a narrative within a narrative or something. But he apparently was a truck driver who went down the I-90 and just killed random people. And he's spent years making comics that are, from my understanding, we don't really get to see too much of them, but the protagonist, or he calls him the hero of the comic, Slasher Man, just kills people. Like, there's no, it doesn't look like there's any real plot, or there isn't really any real, like, message or like anything beyond just horrifically gory stuff. And he's coming to the end of his series, and he doesn't really know how to end it, because he's thinking of maybe trying to do something like artsy and to try to have a message and be like, this whole thing had a point, but he's completely incapable of doing that. And he realizes no one's ever going to see him as anything other than the guy who wrote extremely gory comics. So to try and get inspiration, he's driving through the area where the I-90 killer was, together with his, I don't know if she's his girlfriend or his wife or whatever, and a couple other of his entourage, because she's writing a story, so she's writing a book about the victims of the I-90 killer. Not the I-90 killer itself, but the victims. It's kind of supposed to be a counterpoint, I guess, to his kind of work. It's funny because she says she's never actually read any of his comics, despite them being together. Which, to be honest, I probably wouldn't read them either. They don't look very interesting. That's not to say, like, it doesn't look scary. It doesn't look, like, horrifying or make any kind of... It just seems like violence for violence's sake is what his comics are like. And once again, maybe that's what the title is referencing. Maybe that was kind of the point of the movie. I admit I'm just not big-brained enough to kind of understand these things. I don't know if it's because I partially accepted Death of the Author, or just kind of my experience of studying film criticism in university just really kind of turned me off to a lot of it. But you guys may notice a lot of the time I tend to view movies or just works of fiction in a very straightforward way. I just kind of take it at face value. And if I think it's referencing something, I try to kind of... And if I think it's referencing something or something like that, I tend to take a very, like I said, face value, what seems to be the simplest. And this kind of, I guess, is summarized, this general view of it is summarized with something Terrellian's law that my friend Terrellian came up with. And it is, never try to find an in-universe explanation for something that can be explained through creator incompetence. So, like, if something doesn't make sense, it's probably not because you missed something. It's probably not because the guy's a genius. It's probably because they just screwed up, or the guy's an asshole, or something like, or it just doesn't make sense. Like, maybe kind of an example of this is people trying to come up with reasons why Obi-Wan aged so much from the prequels to the how he is in A New Hope on Tatooine. And it's like, there doesn't need to be an explanation, they just screwed up. Well, it's not that they screwed up, it's just that they, it's just that was just kind of the reality, is Alec Guinness was the perfect actor to play the one role, and Ewan McGregor is the perfect actor to play the other role, and they couldn't have known, like, 60 years ago that the timelines wouldn't match up. That's not like... That's just the case. We don't have to come up with, like, oh, Obi-Wan was, like, the dark side, depression made him age, or something, like some nonsense like that. We can just say Obi-Wan was Obi-Wan. It was just a reality of that. So what I'm kind of saying in the context of, like, a movie is, I kind of feel one of the critical parts, if you're making something, be it a video game or a movie or a novel or whatever, is it's your job as an author to make it so that people can follow it. Not necessarily everybody, but, like, the audience it's designed for, that they can, like, follow it at least as much as they're supposed to. And if people can't follow it, and if people, like, have no idea what's going on and it just doesn't make any sense to them, unless that's, like, some deliberate genre thing like in Dark Souls, it represents a failure of you as the creator. So I tend to say, like, if I pay attention to a movie and I can't follow it and I have no idea what happened and none of the themes make any sense to me, I'm going to reference that in my review. Because to my part, that's probably the most important aspect of it, is to make it accessible. And you can say, well, certain things are niche, or for a certain audience, that's true. So like part of Dark Souls is to try to make modern myth, and part of modern myth is everything's supposed to be part of myth is things are supposed to be vague and symbolic, and you can have contradictions in the plot and that kind of thing. But Dark Souls is like a niche thing that's intended for a certain audience. It's not like, I don't know, like a super action movie or something that's just supposed to be, I'm good, watchable, that sort of thing. So there's all that stuff. But back to the movie, I guess. So the character, he's coming to the end of making his just like super violent comic book, and his girlfriend is making the kind of companion book to it, and he can't figure out how to end it. So they're going on this travel through New York to look at the I guess kind of the place from which Slasher Man was born, and kind of to talk to people there to get some like ideas to finish it. Also, so his GF can do the research needed to write her book. And as they go through there, they begin to be like followed, I guess you could say, by this dude who's cosplaying as Slasher Man. I keep saying Flasher Man. Slasher Man, he tends to have like a knife. He wears like welder clothing. He drives a blacked out truck. Blacked out van. And we see him start to like copy crimes from in the books. So like he just starts committing murders in ways that are like seen within the books themselves. And he keeps calling the comic author guy and giving him a series of numbers. And the guy thinks it's numbers from the Bible, specifically the book of Revelation, but it's actually from issues of his comics. So the guy's like calling him, and then he'll give him like year, issue, page, and that'll be like what he's gonna do next. So that happens a couple times. He manages to kill the guy's assistant, and then I don't know, it doesn't make a lot of sense, manages to run them off the road, and in being run off the road, his publisher dies, and his girlfriend gets badly injured. So then they kind of wake up at like the welder guy's house, and it's confirmed that he was actually the original I-90 killer who was never caught. And the I-90 killer guy talks to him and says, I stopped killing because I started reading your comic book, and it fulfilled it fulfilled my need for violence, because I could tell that you were a kindred spirit, that you understood that what I was trying to do was art, and you were making my art your own, but that I saw that you didn't know how to end it, so I wanted to provide you with an ending. And then we get this bizarre flashback to the last person he killed, and he killed them on Christmas, as they were seated down for Christmas dinner, I think is how it went. And he's like, this is the perfect scene to put at the end of your book. So it kind of concludes my story and your story as well, because your comic book is based off of me. So this is the last crime that I committed, so it should end both of them. I don't know how you can have an ending in a comic book series without a plot. That's like some Seinfeld tier stuff right there. But yeah, so the guy winds up killing his GF, and he kills, he killed the previous two people, so he brings all their corpses there and sets them up around a Christmas table, and he makes like a wreath out of intestines and like all this other stuff out of like, I don't know, various body parts, and there's like a tree with like flesh on it, and it's just kind of like weird stuff like that. And then the guy says, I'm going to provide you with an ending, so just kill me here and it'll be the end to it. So then the slasher man guy gives him his knife, and then the guy takes the knife and kills him, but then he lights everything on fire and says, fuck your ending. And then it's kind of ambiguous whether or not he chooses to stay and die in the fire, or he calls the police or whatever. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. So that all happened. And then it replays the thing from the beginning of the film, but it changes the last line of like his final page from everything else is just masturbation to everything else is just random acts of violence. So I'd say it was like pretentious. They probably should have made the film longer. I guess I could follow it. It just wasn't like that good. I'll give them credit for an indie movie with like the budget they had and probably the amount of time they had to make it. It was like competent enough, but overall I'm just going to say it's not very good. I wouldn't recommend it, but I don't feel like I wasted my time going out and seeing it either. So anyways, hope you found that somewhat amusing at least. God bless, and I'll talk to you guys soon.